She thought it was just another delivery, nothing unusual, just a package at her door. But what she didn't know was that the man behind that delivery had been watching her for months, obsessed with her beauty, fueled by rejection, and waiting for the perfect moment. On the day her husband wasn't home, that moment came, and what followed was a nightmare that would silence not only her voice, but the laughter of her children forever. Welcome to True Crime's Altar, where every sin is punished, every betrayal has a cost, and every soul must answer to the truth. Like, comment, and subscribe, because these are the stories the guilty prayed would stay buried. Leonard Price was 45, though he often looked a decade older. His skin was weathered from years of long rides in sun and rain. His back bent slightly from carrying crates, his hands calloused and cracked from work that never paid enough to matter. He lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, where the hum of dryers was his only company at night. His marriage had ended years ago, leaving him bitter, and his few friends had drifted away with time. Most evenings he sat in silence, drinking cheap beer, scrolling through old pictures of himself when life seemed brighter. But nothing gave him more purpose than the delivery routes. They kept him moving, kept him from drowning in his own loneliness. And yet one stop stood above the rest, a home that had become more than just an address on his clipboard. The Moore residence. Keisha Moore was 36, and to Leonard she was everything he believed life had unfairly denied him. Her warm brown skin seemed to glow under the daylight. Her eyes carried a softness that lingered, and her smile, brief, polite, ordinary to anyone else, felt like a secret meant just for him. Each time she opened the door, he memorized the tilt of her head, the gentle curve of her lips, the rhythm of her voice when she said, "Thank you." In her kindness, he built entire fantasies, weaving stories where she welcomed him inside, where she confessed the same longing he imagined burning inside himself. In reality, Keisha was simply being kind, the way she was to anyone. But to a man like Leonard, whose pride had long since curdled into bitterness, every gesture became evidence of something more. He began timing his routes to catch her at home, slowing his deliveries just to stretch their encounters. Once, emboldened by weeks of these small exchanges, he found the courage to speak words that had lived in his head for too long. He complimented her beauty, hinted at the possibility of more between them. But Keisha's response was firm, her tone steady. "I'm married," she told him with no hesitation. "I love my husband, and I'm not interested in that." Her rejection was not cruel. She handled him with dignity, even kindness. But Leonard felt the sting of humiliation cut deep. In that moment, he saw not grace but judgment, not dignity but dismissal. He drove away that day, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, a storm of rage and shame boiling inside him. That wound never healed. It festered. Every time he delivered to her door afterward, the memory of her refusal burned hotter. He told himself she had led him on, that her smile had been false, that her kindness was nothing more than mockery. And in his twisted mind, her rejection had stolen something from him, something he felt entitled to. Marcus Moore, Keisha's husband, became a shadow in Leonard's thoughts, a man he resented though he barely knew him. Marcus was tall, hard-working, a provider, the kind of man Leonard once dreamed of being. In his jealousy, Leonard began to despise the life that unfolded in that house. Keisha's laughter carrying through the open window, the children's voices echoing in the yard, the small moments of joy that seemed unreachable to him. To Leonard, it was paradise dangled just out of reach, a paradise that mocked him with every passing day. Inside, Keisha lived unaware of the danger her kindness had stirred. Her life was busy, full of routines, getting the kids ready for school, helping Jada with homework, chasing after Caleb's boundless energy, waiting up for Marcus when he returned home late from work. She had her worries, her struggles, but she carried them with grace, never imagining that someone who smiled at her door carried darker intentions in his heart. But Leonard had begun to see her refusal not as a closed door, but as a wound demanding to be avenged. What started as admiration had soured into obsession. And obsession, once it tastes humiliation, does not fade, it sharpens. It whispers lies into a man's ear, convincing him that what he cannot have is rightfully his, and that the only way to reclaim it is through power. Leonard's heart no longer longed for companionship. It longed for conquest. And conquest, when born of envy and pride, leaves nothing behind but ruin. Leonard's obsession deepened with every passing week. What once was a lingering thought during deliveries became the only thing he could think about when the day was over. At night, he sat in his dim apartment, replaying every second of his encounters with Keisha. The way she smiled as she held the door open, the soft tone of her voice when she told her children to settle down in the background, the glimpse of her wedding band catching the light as she signed for a package. He twisted each detail into fuel, convincing himself she was aware of the effect she had on him, that she had chosen to stir feelings she had no intention of fulfilling. In his mind, she was teasing him, toying with him, mocking him by hiding behind her marriage. Reality had no place in the world Leonard had built inside his head. Pride blinded him, and pride, when humiliated, festers into something far more sinister. Meanwhile, life in the Moore household carried on in rhythm, as ordinary as it was beautiful. Keisha filled her days with the small joys of motherhood, packing Jada's lunchbox with her favorite snacks, laughing as Caleb chased her around the living room, waiting in the driveway to wave goodbye when Marcus pulled out for another late shift. Their home was full of love, simple and steady, though not without its struggles. Money was tight sometimes. Schedules kept them busy, but the foundation was strong. Marcus adored his wife, and Keisha loved him in return. To Leonard, those moments glimpsed from the outside became unbearable. He began to compare Marcus to himself, convincing himself that Marcus was unworthy of the life he had. He noticed Marcus's absences, the way Keisha was left alone often, and in his bitterness he twisted it into proof that she must be lonely, unsatisfied, secretly waiting for a man like him to step in. The lie took root, and once it did, it grew uncontrollably. He began to linger longer in his truck parked down the block, watching the Moore home. He noticed the times Marcus's car was gone, the rhythm of when the children came home from school, the quiet afternoons when Keisha might be alone. The thought that had once seemed impossible now started to feel like opportunity. He told himself he only wanted to speak to her again, to show her she was wrong to reject him, to prove that she truly wanted him but was too afraid to admit it. But behind that delusion was something far darker, an anger that demanded release. Envy is not just longing for what someone else has. It is hatred for the one who holds it. And in Leonard's chest, envy burned hotter every day, stripping away reason until all that remained was the hunger to take by force what kindness had denied him. Keisha remained unaware of the eyes that followed her, the bitterness that brewed in silence. She had long forgotten that awkward moment months ago, dismissing it as nothing more than misplaced boldness from a delivery man. But for Leonard, that single rejection had become the center of his world, the wound around which every thought revolved. And in the twisted silence of his loneliness, the line between admiration and possession had vanished completely. Where love should have built protection, obsession had built a cage, and Leonard was ready to drag her inside it with him. For when pride and desire unite in a man who refuses to accept no, what follows is not love, but violence waiting for its hour. The day arrived with nothing unusual to mark it, but for Leonard, it was the moment he had been waiting for. The air was heavy with late summer heat as he pulled his delivery truck into the Moore's quiet neighborhood, sweat rolling down his temple. He had checked the schedule twice that morning, memorizing every stop, every window of time, and when he saw Marcus's car missing from the driveway, his chest tightened. This was the opportunity his pride had been thirsting for, the opening his obsession had convinced him was fate. He stepped from the truck slowly, clutching the package in one hand, rehearsing in his head what he would say. His heart pounded, not from nerves, but from a dark kind of anticipation, the kind that had been building for months. He walked to the porch, the boards creaking under his boots, and knocked. Inside, children's voices could be heard, Jada laughing at something Caleb said, and then Keisha appeared, her beauty as effortless as ever. She smiled politely, her guard completely lowered, as she opened the door. "Afternoon, Mr. Price," she said, recognizing him at once. Her voice was warm, casual, the kind of tone she gave to anyone, but to Leonard it was gasoline on fire. He handed her the package, but instead of stepping away as usual, he lingered. "Your husband not around?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Keisha hesitated, a flicker of caution crossing her face, then shook her head. No, he's at work, but I've got it handled. Thank you. She reached to close the door, but Leonard pressed forward slightly, his boot holding the frame. His voice dropped lower. You know, Keisha, I haven't forgotten how you embarrassed me that day. You made me feel small, like I wasn't good enough to even look at you. She froze, clutching the package tighter against her chest. Mr. Price, this isn't appropriate. Please, leave. But her firmness only stoked the fire in him. You think you're better than me? You think because you've got a nice house and a man who leaves you alone all day that you can look down on me? His words dripped with bitterness, his body trembling with suppressed rage. Keisha's eyes darted toward the living room where Jada and Caleb were, her instincts screaming to protect them. I said leave, she repeated, her voice now sharper, but Leonard had crossed a threshold from which he could not turn back. In his mind, this was not rejection, it was humiliation replaying itself, demanding to be avenged. He pushed the door wider, stepping inside. Keisha backed up quickly, her voice rising. Don't do this. You need to go right now. But Leonard's breathing grew heavier, his eyes wild. He saw not a woman's plea for safety, but a challenge to his pride, a refusal to bend to his will. And pride, once wounded, will not settle for silence. It demands conquest. He closed the door behind him, locking it with a slow, deliberate click. At that moment, Keisha realized she and her children were trapped inside with a man whose obsession had curdled into violence, a man who had mistaken kindness for invitation and rejection for insult. And in his twisted heart, he had already decided that today would be the day she paid for it. When pride clouds a man's soul, he no longer sees faces, only battles to win, only wounds to avenge. And the battlefield he chose was the home of an innocent woman who had only ever shown him courtesy. Leonard's chest heaved as he stood in the Moore's living room, the package discarded on the floor, his boots heavy against the carpet. Keisha's heart raced, her arms instinctively spread wide as if her body could shield Jada and Caleb, who stood frozen in the doorway. Take your kids upstairs, she whispered to them, her voice trembling but firm. Now. Jada tugged at Caleb's hand, pulling him toward the staircase, her wide eyes locked on Leonard as though she already understood the danger in his stare. Leonard smirked, his voice low and venomous. They don't need to leave. They should see who their mother really is. Acting so high and mighty, like you're untouchable. But I know the truth. I know you've thought about me. His words dripped with delusion, twisting her politeness into lies. Keisha's voice hardened, though her body shook. You're sick. You're making this up. Leave my house before I call the police. She reached for her phone on the counter, but Leonard lunged forward, knocking it from her hand, the device clattering across the floor. He pinned her wrist against the wall, his face inches from hers, the stench of his breath hot and sour. Police? He spat. And tell them what? That I wanted what you've been dangling in my face all this time? That you smiled at me, led me on, then laughed when you turned me down? His grip tightened, and Keisha winced, her voice breaking but resolute. That's not true. I was only ever kind. You're twisting everything. Her defiance, even in fear, cut him deeper than any insult. Pride does not forgive resistance. It feeds on it, grows more desperate. And Leonard was a man who had lived too long in the shadows of rejection, too long in the prison of his own self-pity. In his mind, this was his redemption, his moment to reclaim the dignity he believed she had stolen. He shoved her onto the couch, his strength overpowering hers as she fought desperately to break free. The room filled with the sound of her struggle, the muffled cries of her children upstairs, the snapping of something sacred breaking in two. What followed was not love, nor even desire. It was violence masked as entitlement, obsession masquerading as justice. To force himself upon her was not only to violate her body, but to desecrate every vow he once spoke to his own wife, every bond of respect that makes men human. To rape is to murder the soul long before breath leaves the body, and Leonard did it with a cruelty born of wounded pride. When it was over, Keisha lay trembling, clutching at herself, tears streaming silently as her strength drained. She looked at him with a gaze that held no fear, only disgust, and that gaze was unbearable. Leonard paced the floor like a cornered animal, his chest heaving, his hands shaking as he tried to mask his shame with anger. "You made me do this," he muttered, his words an echo of every coward who blames his sins on the innocent. But his shame was not finished with her. Pride that has tasted power does not retreat. It demands more, and it whispers the most terrible lie of all, that silence can only be guaranteed in death. The house had gone unbearably still, save for the muffled whimpers from upstairs where Jada and Caleb clung to one another, too afraid to come down, too afraid to look away. Keisha sat on the couch, her body trembling, her eyes fixed on Leonard with a hatred that pierced deeper than any weapon. That look, that unbroken defiance, even after all he had taken, struck him like a knife. She was not broken. She would not beg. She would not bow. And to Leonard's diseased pride, that was unforgivable. He paced the living room, muttering to himself, hands raking through his graying hair as though trying to claw the shame away. "You think you can just call the cops now? Ruin me? Make me into nothing?" His voice cracked with rage. "You've already made yourself into nothing." Those words landed like a final verdict, and his face twisted. To a man like Leonard, who had spent a lifetime blaming the world for his emptiness, the truth was a poison he could not swallow. He stormed toward the staircase, his boots thudding heavy on the steps as Jada's scream tore through the air. "Mama!" she cried, but Leonard's shadow loomed larger than her tiny frame. Caleb's sobs filled the hallway as he tried to hide behind his sister, but Leonard's fury was already beyond reason. To him, the children were witnesses. To him, they were proof of Marcus's life, proof of everything he could never have. And in his twisted mind, the only way to erase his shame was to erase them too. The first strike silenced Jada's scream. The second ended Caleb's cries. The laughter that had once filled that home was extinguished in an instant, replaced by a silence so heavy it seemed the walls themselves mourned. Keisha's scream carried through the house, a sound of pure anguish that would have shattered any man with a soul. But Leonard no longer carried one. He returned to her slowly, his face blank, his eyes hollow as if even he no longer recognized the man he had become. She fought him with everything she had left, clawing at his arms, spitting curses through her tears, but he overpowered her, pressing her against the floor. "You should have said yes," he hissed. "You should have just given me what I wanted." His words, soaked in cowardice, betrayed the truth. This was not about love or even lust. It was about control, about pride too fragile to bear rejection. And in the final moments, as her strength gave way under his, Keisha's last thought was not of herself, but of the children he had already taken from her. Leonard ended her life with the same hands that had once held packages at her door, and when it was done, he stood in the ruins of a family he had envied, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning the silence he had created. But silence built on blood is never peace. It is damnation. For sin always demands more than what it promises, and Leonard had given everything, his humanity, his soul, and the lives of 3 innocents, to a hunger that would never be satisfied. The hours that followed were a blur of horror no words could contain. Marcus returned from work to a house that no longer breathed, his voice echoing through the hallways as he called out for his wife and children. What answered him was silence, heavy and suffocating, broken only when he stumbled upon the truth no man should ever have to see. Neighbors gathered outside as the wail of sirens split the evening sky, officers storming the Moore home, their faces hardening as they uncovered the tragedy within. Leonard Price did not get far. Blood never lets a man walk clean, and it was only a matter of hours before detectives traced his route, before evidence led them straight to his door. He was found alone, still wearing the same uniform he had worn that day, staring at his own reflection as though he too could not believe what he had become. The trial was swift, the evidence undeniable, the verdict certain. And yet, even in chains, Leonard never truly admitted guilt. He muttered excuses, blamed humiliation, painted himself as a victim of rejection. But no excuse can wash away blood. No rejection justifies destruction. In the end, he was condemned not only by the court, but by the weight of what he had done. A man who let pride and obsession rule him until all that was left was ruin. The Moore home, once filled with laughter, stood in haunting silence. Toys remained scattered where little hands had left them. A half-finished drawing sat abandoned on the table, its colors bright against the dark truth that no child would finish it. A woman's favorite mug sat on the counter, untouched since the morning she had last used it. The ordinary became memorial, every object whispering of lives stolen too soon. And the reflection remains for us all. Obsession is not love, it is hunger. Rejection is not humiliation, it is freedom from chains you should never wear. But when a man confuses possession for passion, when pride twists kindness into mockery, destruction is never far behind. Leonard Price proved that a heart left to envy and bitterness will not stop at rejection. It will consume innocence, devour purity, and leave only silence where love once lived. If you followed this story to the end, share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe obsession like this could ever be prevented, or does it always end in tragedy? Don't forget to subscribe to True Crimes Altar for more haunting stories told in full. And let us know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. We would love to hear your voice among this community.